Oh my goodness. Hello chat, hello Twitch, hello everyone. Welcome to Shadowward Podcast episode 5. And I'm a little sleepy this morning, that's okay. We're going to get through this. We have a lot to talk about with 10.1 coming sooner than I think a lot of people maybe expected. Today it's just Saeldur and I. So Saeldur, how's it going, man? Yeah, how is it being the Evoker Theory Crafter and the Warlock Theory Crafter and, you know, everything?
It's going good. I've been a bit busy doing Sims for the last week, basically, just non-stop.
So yeah, we have quite a bit to talk about today. So we're gonna try to focus it a little bit. So yeah, we're gonna try to keep today's episode a little focused because there is quite a lot to talk about with 10.1. So specifically, we want to go over just in general what's changing in 10.1, how do things feel, like good and bad stuff. There's some general things we want to cover as well, and then we want to kind of do a little bit on the raid as well. So unfortunately, we couldn't get. We asked a few people around that have done a lot of raid testing to help out, but we did get some feedback from people, so we'll try to go over some of that as well later today. So yeah, let's kind of start off with. Let's see. Let's just do rework thoughts first, I think, of just how we're feeling with the rework. I'll start with you. I mean, I know like we can kind of go like positives and then negatives first. So let's go positives. I think the biggest one to talk about is build diversity, which I think was one of the things they put in the blue post. And I think you can point on the tree where it's like gotten noticeably better. Anything specifically you want to call out from like a build diversity improvement?
I feel like they've done like a fairly good job in a lot of the tree now. The top is the worst, of course. We'll get to that in a minute. That hasn't changed. But with the recent changes to Yogg-Saron, for example, basically all of the middle talents see play, except for Unfurling Darkness. Like everything in the middle will see play, and then like all of them, except Unfurling. In certain different scenarios, of course. Not in the same build. You don't take them all in the same build.
Okay, yeah. So so I agree. Build diversity, middle section's better, bottom section feels better. I think a lot of that comes down to like they changed the pathing suggestions we were talking about it, right?
Very well.
But like it was, you know, the top section wasn't fixed. It was actually made worse, right? Because before you could drop Sear, right, if you wanted to, and then you could pick up that extra point of utility. But now in that top section, you kind of don't have a choice anymore, right? Like if you're AoEing, you have to pick all three. So that kind of sucks. So yeah, basically, if you want that extra utility, you now lose damage, basically, unless it's like absolutely pure single target, which will happen occasionally. I think there's like a couple fights in the raid where that's a thing. So yeah, let's see. Other positives to cover. So the Psychic Scream Void Tendrils being uncapped, definitely a positive there. I mean, I was kind of hoping we got it sooner, but you know, it's something for sure. And then button bloat. So this is something I'd like your thoughts on.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Post again, they were like, yeah, button bloat has gotten better, right? But I don't know how much they've accomplished that.
It basically hasn't changed. Like on single target, yeah, with lost buttons, we no longer have Spike and Flay, and we also don't have Shadow Crash anymore, so we've gained 2 buttons back. But like stuff like Divine Star and Halo are just better now, and you use them rotationally. Yeah. So there's kind of a button back, because before they just used to be damage neutral. You press them when you wanted to press them, rather than kind of rotational. I mean, the condition is a bit odd for that, but it's basically just a filler spell. Like, I mean, I guess we've kind of got death back, kind of, but not really, but kind of, but not really. But it's much the same to me. To be honest, it's just much the same. And it kind of feels worse at the same time. Like, they haven't really removed the button bloat. They've removed a lot of the decision. That's like the main thing is they've removed a lot of the decisions. Like, there's no longer a decision to take to do Mind Sear or Devouring Plague.
Okay, so build diversity is improved. To get us back on topic. Button bloat is not really changed. I think we can fairly say that.
Yeah, we still have a lot of buttons.
We still have a lot of buttons. I mean, just straight up. Even non-rotational ones, we still have a lot. But I think the other thing that I think I'm most excited for is talent improvements. So I think they did a pretty good job listening to, I think, specific points of feedback for a lot of things. And we did get notable improvements to at least a few of our talents. So I think the first one I'd like to cover is Cthulhu. I don't know if you want to cover this one or I can.
I mean, you can. You seem pretty excited.
Dude, Cthulhu's awesome now. So they one of the main complaints with Cthulhu was that it was just like an RNG thing, right? Like people couldn't control when you got a proc. But they've now linked that up with so Mind Spike can now proc it, which is good with the new rework, and then Void Torrent can now proc it as well, and you get a proc every time you press Void Torrent immediately, which feels awesome. So they kind of added like Cthulhu is still RNG, but you have some elements of control to where you'll always get a tendril in the middle of your burst, which is sweet. And now that Void Torrent is a 45-second cooldown baseline or 30 seconds with Damnation, which you'll take quite a lot, that's pretty awesome. So yeah, in general, the bottom right section of our tree, very valuable talent points. So yeah, and I do think, you know, maybe it's a little unhealthy because I think we did some tests just early on, and it does feel like Cthulhu is kind of a madman of a talent. Like, you know, pathing down there is almost always the right move, but I think it's fun. I think I like it.
I, if they had to pick one of them to like go with that you should always have, I think Cthulhu is like the best one. It's generic. They're pretty nice looking nowadays. They add a bit of visual, and they're also cheap. It's 3 points in like the builds that take just to take Cthulhu. They just Void Torrent, Malediction, and then Cthulhu. It's great. It almost said in this off because of live.
Yeah, and I think it kind of opens up to like the build saying like, okay, you start off on the edges, like you always have Cthulhu pretty much, or even Yashiraj has the same thing. Like you can get it pretty like cheaply. Although Yashiraj is kind of surrounded by less ideal points. So I think that's nice, and then you can kind of fill in with the middle section, which has the kind of the bulky talents, I guess, so to speak, with all like the 2-pointers with Mastermind, Screams, Tormented Spirits, and then Insidious Ire. Although again, we'll talk about the power level of some of those in a bit, but yeah, Ire also got improvements as well. So Ire now works with Void Torrent, which is again pretty sweet. So I think they're making Void Torrent feel more core to the kit, which I think was something we were kind of leaning into as the expansion started, but now it feels like, no, this is something, again, you're going to take kind of all the time. How do you feel about Void Torrent in general? Is that like a positive direction for you, or?
I wasn't actually the biggest fan of 30-second Void Torrent on live because it just feels quite awkward, especially in dungeons right now. A lot of the times you take it, you're just going to press it, and then you're not going to press it again. You're going to get one a pack. You do get one every pack, for sure, but you sometimes just don't get the second one. In raids, it's a lot better, but there was a lot of times when you like couldn't press it because of insanity, or you couldn't press it because of moving, or couldn't press it because of that.
True.
However, saying that, they did nerf the insanity on it. It's now 24 instead of 60, which makes it significantly better to play with, despite the nerf. Because you can just press Void Torrent. There isn't as much waiting. Which does fix my issues with the 30-second that we had before, where it was just delayed all the time. It's now no longer anywhere nearly as delayed.
Yeah, so you're saying we no longer have that problem that a lot of people probably have on live, where you're kind of like juggling all of your procs and spending insanity so that you don't cap insanity when you press Void Torrent, right? Which happens all the time, even single target AoE all over the place. And oftentimes you kind of had to, you know, make a decision at some point, like, yeah, I need to press Void Torrent, right? Even if you might cap a little bit, like you have to get it out at some point.
Yep.
Which never felt good. So they definitely solved that problem. And I actually think they do have a new talent called Void Touched, which I thought would see more play than I think we're actually seeing, but it still has some use cases. And notably, it's increasing our insanity cap, so we go all the way up to 150. But they've also kind of nerfed our insanity generation as well. So basically, if you have any problems over capping, you can take that talent, Void Touched, and you're almost like immune from over capping, right? Even if you're like pressing Void Torrent and all that kind of stuff, there's less to worry about in terms of like, oh, I can't press this, otherwise I'll cap. Like that should happen almost never now. So that's nice.
It is.
The other thing, and I think I want to cover this as a positive. I know we've kind of gone back and forth on it a little bit, is Shadow Death and Death Speaker. So I'll let you take this one a little bit more because I think you're a bit more knowledgeable on like the nitty gritty parts of Death Speaker. But I do think there are some positives to take here because I think before you go, just for some context, like on live, Shadow Word Death is a button that we only press during our bender windows with Inescapable Torment. Outside of that, you can't really think of anything really to use it. And I think with the death buffs in general, or did it ever come out to a buff? They've changed the
No, it's a
cooldown.
nerf now.
Yeah, so I don't know. They've done a lot of weird things, and then they've also buffed the crap out of Death Speaker. So tell us about this lovely talent.
So, if anyone here remembers the previous version of our tier set, we were going to be playing Death Speaker with Idle v Charge, and we had concerns about just being forced to play Bender your charge everywhere. So, in the process of changing that, they nerfed the Death's baseline damage numbers, and they also then buffed the Execute. Unfortunately, they didn't buff the Execute by enough to compensate for the initial damage loss very much, so it ends up basically being a slight nerf. However, at the same time, they made it a 10-second cooldown, which is really, really nice for movement. Death is now one of our best tools for moving. It hits reasonably hard, it makes a bit of resource, and it's just decent. It's just good enough.
It's like,
You
what,
don't want
10
to press it
insanity?
if you could avoid it. It's 4, I think, like everything else in that kit.
Oh, is the Death Speaker proc 10? Is that what I was thinking of?
No, the Death Speaker doesn't do anything. It just makes it do damage. It's like a death execute death.
Okay. I don't know why it's
So
10.
death like that is then just execute. It also provides a considerable DPS increase in execute with you pressing it every 10 seconds now. However, the Death Speaker node itself is primarily useful if you need to move. It's also quite good in dungeons, but it's like used as a way of getting to other points in the tree, like getting to the Zoth in dungeons is one of the main reasons why it's used sometimes. And the other time it's used is just you need to move. And this provides you, I think it's got 2.25 procs a minute worth of movement, which is quite a lot when you have no procs for movement, which is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, so we lost Surge of Darkness procs for movement, which was that, I forget, was that hasted? I think it. No, it just
That
didn't.
was
It
just
just wasn't.
flat chance.
It was a flat chance. That's right. So yeah, so it's less good in AOE for sure, but at least you have some, and I think that's kind of the big use case for Death Speaker. I think a lot of the top talent builds aren't really running Death Speaker right now. At least a good chunk of them. There might be some dungeon builds that I think like it more than others, but yeah, I have seen some cases where it's like, okay, well, you could choose to drop this 1 point in like Screams of the Void or something to pick up Death Speaker. You'll take a hit in damage, but you do get
0.6%.
some more like movement, right? Or ability to move, cast while moving. But yeah, we do have a hard casted Shadow Word Death, which now, I mean, it hits less than a Mind Blast, I think.
Yeah, it's 60% versus a Mind Blast at like 90.
So it's it hits for something, and then you get a little bit of insanity for kind of like wasting your time, so to speak, on a spell that doesn't really do much. So yeah, I think that's their answer for the movement problem, which I think did we cover all the positives? Yeah. So moving on
kinda?
to. Oh, do you have any other positives you'd like to bring up that I missed?
No, I mean, most of them is just simplifying the gameplay like thoughts for people. Like,
Sure.
it's just removing all of those decision branches that were paralyzing people that didn't know class in and out. They've been removed. A lot of those decision branches have been removed. That is also a negative. Let's go to the negatives. We can talk about that in a little bit later.
Yeah. So I think
Shot would like us to talk about that.
yeah, no, that's a good point. So one of the biggest negatives that we kind of were segueing to was movement. So I think a lot of people, including myself, were hesitant when they removed Surge of Darkness. We were like, okay, well, Surge of Darkness is kind of propping up our ability to handle moving right now. It procs quite a lot, especially in AoE, and you basically have this like high damage spell, and it was sitting in this sweet spot, right, of like, you can use the procs, but if you waste them, it's not the end of the world. And movement events were happening often enough to where you actually got pretty good value out of these instant casts. So now we don't have that, right? And they haven't really given us much to replace that. So I think the main one to talk about that we kind of already brought up is Shadow Word Death and Death Speaker. Those are notably improved from what we have on live in like those iterations, but it's still not quite enough to bridge the gap of what we have on live. So So yeah, it seems like that's their answer for movement. But yeah, like you mentioned before, we can kind of counter that if you want to take Divine Star, I guess. Um,
Yep.
but that requires you to be 24 yards away from your target. Any further, and you lose damage. So that doesn't feel great. And then the other kind of nerf to movement, which I actually don't think is getting talked about as much, is we aren't exactly casting Devouring Plague as often as we are on live. Especially with the nerfs to Mind Devour. If you were playing Mind Devour even on single target, you got quite a lot of instant casts of just pressing Devouring Plague, or even pressing Shadow Crash. Actually, that's another one that we're losing in single target. So I think overall we've lost quite a lot of mobility. We haven't really gained much. Yeah, I don't know. Did I miss anything? I think that's kind of it. We're kind of in, from a mobility perspective, it's not the best.
We're kind of just, yeah, significantly worse for mobility. There's nothing we gain that helps, except for the dead speaker, but it doesn't really help. And it's honestly worse as well. The Void Torrent booting you to the ground every 30 seconds.
Yeah,
We're not
true.
even playing Mindbender anymore. We don't have your charge to get those free deaths, because your charge let us use deaths as a movement
Hmm.
button during its windows without like a DPS loss at all. Stuff like that. So like we're just worse.
There is a bit
Way
of,
around
I
it.
forgot there, because with the tier set, we do get a bit more shadowy
Oh,
insight procs, right?
yeah, we do. We get what is it? Let me just look at my tier.
20%,
It's
25.
25%.
20, yeah.
Yeah,
So like
that's nice.
that's something, but they also changed how shadowy insight procs worked, which
Yep.
kind of adds salt to the wound. So I think we've explained this problem like 3 times, but would you mind doing it again with shadowy insight?
So Shadowy Insight on Live, when you get a proc, gives you an additional charge of Mind Blast. This means whenever it procs, no matter what, you'll gain a charge. You'll always gain a charge, and you'll always be able to use it as an instant cast. The only caveat is if you already have one, you can't get two, so it just overwrites. But for the most part, you're always going to get a Mind Blast. Now, with the new version of Shadowy Insight, they changed this behavior so it just resets the current cooldown of Mind Blast. Like, if you have one, so like if you have no charges of Mind Blast, it will reset a single charge of Mind Blast. Therefore, it's the same in this case. However, if you have one charge of Mind Blast already, and it triggers, you will gain the difference from 1 to 2, which will be just however much cooldown is remaining on the Mind Blast that you'll gain, which drastically decreases how good it is, and it lowers the number of Mind Blasts that we can get in the sim by quite a lot, just because we just get less Shadowy Insight procs. Sorry, we get less real Mind Blast because Shadowy Insight is actually eating real Mind Blasts,
Yeah.
because it's eating our cooldown time that we were having. This is also a reason why now the sims really, really heavily favor pressing Mind Blast. They try and stay on 0 charges as much as possible so that it doesn't lose charges.
Yeah, especially now that those charges are so like shadowy insights like pretty good, right? Like
Shadowy Insight procs hit really hard.
with the tier set specifically,
Yep.
they hit massively hard. So like you really don't want to ever be in a situation where you're losing those, right? Um, so yeah, kind of poopy. And I think like the biggest thing that's weird about this, we had no communication around this. They made the change. They did put it in the notes saying like, hey, we're reverting this back. Because it was, I think it originally launched like that, right, in beta when they brought it back.
Yep.
But then we gave them feedback in beta and they changed it, and now they've put it back. But they didn't
The thing that to me that's weird
say
is
anything.
Death Speaker works like the charge system. They use the
Yes,
charge system
yeah,
on Death Speaker.
yeah. In the same patch notes where they changed Shadowy Insight back to the way that we don't like, they made Death Speaker work the way that we do. Like, so they recognize that it's a problem to solve, but I guess they purposely. I don't know if it feels like from a PvP use case. I don't know too much about it, but in the notes they were referencing they wanted less instant casts in PvP, and I'm guessing this was their answer to that.
Unfortunately, that just screws us in PvE entirely because we now have no mobility cooldown to get around and
Yeah,
no instant casts.
yeah. I mean, again, I think for a change like this, it would have been better if we had like, hey, here's why we're making this, especially considering they've like changed it twice now and since the expansions come out. So it's like, yeah, would prefer some communication around that. But yeah, between that and mobility kind of downgrades, certainly not good. So if we kind of segue a little bit, those are two things that I would love to see change still. I think you probably agree is like, let's revert that shadowy insight change. That'd be a massive improvement for PvE or quality of life improvement, I guess is what I'd say. And then
Yeah.
mobility wise, before we move off of it, I think there are some like any specific suggestions that you have of like small things that you'd like to see to kind of improve that?
Instant cast on either Mindflay Insanity or Mindspike Insanity potentially, just so that you get the rotational cadence of being able to press Devouring Plague, then having a follow-up instant at some point at your control after the press, which gives you like a 2-for-1 instant value.
Yeah,
Or like, if they don't want to give us any of that, just give us something that interspaces us. Like, sorry, as it stands right now, we have so few instant casts that if they gave us an instant displacement and then left us like this, that would also potentially be quite balanced. Like this would be like Warlocks. They have about what we have right now in terms of instant casts on Demonology, but they have Circle.
they have demonic
So if
circle.
we had
Yeah.
our own version of Circle, I think would be fine.
Would Door of Shadows be enough then to kind of answer that?
Yep.
Like, because Door of Shadows is not instant; it is a casted. But is that enough?
I think so. Ideally, we'd have an instant one, but you can't ask for everything. Just having one would be good.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I was actually watching. I think there was a video that came out. I think it was Boney that put out a PvP video, kind of like giving his thoughts on Shadow in 10.1. He actually said the same thing. He's like, make Mind Flay Insanity cast while moving, make Mind Spike Insanity instant cast. So even they want this, so that which is cool. But yeah, I think it would. The other problem that we didn't get to quite yet is Mind Spike Insanity. So we can kind of talk about that, or just kind of like get into like feel wise of some of the playstyle on 10.1. Because I think a lot of people are going to be a little shocked. I think if they haven't played it yet, it's going to play a little differently than they're used to. The first thing to talk about is the Mind Flay Mind Spike change. So
Yeah.
you no longer have both, right? Like you can't press Mind Flay and Mind Spike in the same build anymore, which on paper is an improvement, but they didn't really, I don't know, they didn't go far enough with that, I think. So now you basically choose Mind Spike as your filler, or if you don't take Mind Spike as a talent, you just get Mind Flay. Yeah, so I'll kind of ask for your thoughts first, as kind of like in general, like how that feels, because now if you're talenting into Spike, you have a hard casted filler now instead of a channeled filler, which is something that we've had forever. So how does it feel for you? What are your thoughts on it?
So there's like two avenues I want to address. There's like the design perspective, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
also just the gameplay feel perspective. So from the gameplay feel perspective, like Mindflay is fairly iconic Shadow.
Yeah,
Shadows do the Mindflay thing, and everybody can see the Mindflay thing. Especially now that we've lost our shadowy apparitions being visible. You know, that was part of our clip that everybody could see, and some people like that. I personally am fairly, I just don't care. Like I just don't care. But
sure.
I know some people like that. Now, like additionally, Mind Spike itself just doesn't have enough animation. You do Mind Spike, and it's just a normal default casting animation, and when it goes off, there's like a little jump light on the enemy. It's just really insignificant. And unfortunately, that continues with the Mind Spike Insanity, which makes Mind Spike Insanity feel really underwhelming. Now, from a design perspective, I have concerns because if there's a talent on the point, it kind of has to increase the damage. So the Mind Spike has to be better than Mind Flay, which means it has to, you have like when you put a point in Mind Spike, it should make you do more damage, which makes the Mind Flay versus Mind like Spike conversation like very weird when it's always going to be damage increase. And that kind of means they have to make Mind Flay Insanity the entire reason why you want to play with Mind Flay. Like Mind
Right.
Flay Insanity has to be good enough to make you want to not take Mind Spike. And then the question then becomes when Mind Spike takes 2 points, why take why would take MSI at all when you can just take MFI and get the really good MFI? And it becomes an awkward balance. And it basically ends up boiling down to there needs to be competitive points for the Mind Spike and Mind Melt route on the tree that you'd like to put points into, but you currently like, but there currently aren't competitive points that are powerful enough to compete to make us want to play Mind Flay.
Yeah, so I'll share my screen and kind of show this real quick to kind of illustrate your point. So we're coming down into our build, so this is our standard top section. As you come into this, like what Saeldur was saying, you know,
Wasn't that nice?
oh, the sublords came back. Oh no. What Sailor was saying was that when you press Mind Spike here, or when you're talenting into Mind Spike, this is costing a talent point. So because it costs a talent point, they had to make it buffed effectively. So meaning it actually does more damage than Mind Flay. Because again, you're spending a talent point. And obviously Mind Melt doesn't work with Mind Flay. So what Sailor is saying is when you're coming down here and you're kind of making a build, Mind Spike is effectively, or to end up playing Mind Flay, these other talent points need to be competitive. They are kind of competitive with each other, but when you kind of add up kind of the overall value of like Mind Spike, Mind Melt, and specifically Mind Spike Insanity, that's when things stop being, the choice kind of flies out the window, especially on like single target. I think once you get up to like 4 targets, these 2 points in Mind Spike and Mind Melt spent elsewhere do start to at least break even with Mind Spike on like heavy multi-target. But what it does mean is almost every build will include Mind Spike and Mind Melt. I think almost every single one. So, yeah, kind of sad.
Yeah.
The other thing too is that like I don't know if you mentioned this, but like Mind Spike Insanity feels exactly the same.
Yep, I mentioned it very briefly. It has no additional animation. It has nothing special. It's just exactly the same button that you pressed before. It just does more damage.
Well,
Feels
that's
horrible.
not entirely true. You do get that HUD animation.
Oh no, a HUD animation. I
So
feel special.
so today on live, you guys, if you play with default UI, you get that HUD animation of Surge of Darkness procs. So you get the one on the left and the one on the right. You still have that with with Mind Spike Insanity, but it doesn't like functionally like the way it plays. It doesn't do anything. It's actually probably gonna tilt a lot of people because they're gonna think that they have an instant cast Mind Spike because that's what they're used to, but it's casted.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so I feel like it needs an animation or it needs to be like instant because like there needs to be a difference in feel. And there isn't a difference in feel at all.
Yeah, and I think making Mind Spike Insanity instant cast would go a long way to fix the feel perspective. It would also help with mobility, right? I think we were kind of pitching Mind Flay Insanity would be cast while moving to be somewhat more competitive. Like that's kind of a separate problem, I think, of like, how do you make the rest of it competitive with like if you don't want to play Mind Spike, right?
Yeah.
Because yeah, like when you look at the tree, you're like, well, what's the point of Mind Spike?
Yeah.
There isn't
The,
one.
the other thing about it, the other thing about it is the other reason why it's got a bit better is because we've lost the points on the left hand side that where we used to be able to spend stuff. They weren't very good before, but they were required to path through your charge.
Oh
Because we
yeah,
no longer have to path through your charge, we've gained 2 points back, which is another reason why we basically always take Spike because it just ends up being efficient.
you're talking about. So on live, we had like the talents that no one knows what they do, like Coalescing Shadows,
Yeah.
Puppet Master. Yeah, these guys were just like they were fine. They didn't change how you play, but they, at least from single target, they were fine. But yeah, now I think, and you hinted this, but you want to talk about like your charge pathing a little bit?
Yeah, okay. So your charge, may he rest in peace, is now dead talent. We don't take him anymore.
Yeah,
But there's many reasons for this. Some of them are pathing, and some of them are just general balance related. So pathing wise, to get to your charge, you have to either go through Shadow Crash, which is now incredibly disincentivized to take on single target. You do not want to take it on single target if you can. They made it just straight up bad.
70%
This is
less
good.
damage or something.
Yeah, they nerfed the damage considerably and made the Insanity Generation like 6.
Yeah,
This is a good change. Nothing Shadow Crash is actually a good change. I will fight people on it. However, the other option is Maddening Touch, which just isn't so good. So, compared to the other options on the talent row, at least, like for example, Phantasmal Pathogen on the right hand side is just a lot better, and Lens Eye and Distorted Reality kind of like laughs in the face of everything else because it only costs 1 point.
yeah,
So that already heavily incentivized going into the bottom right section. And then just your charge just isn't very good anymore. It's just not very good. The nerf to Mindbender, the nerf to everything else around it, when we had that previous tier set, just have killed the talents essentially. And they removed the tier set, but they didn't put the nerf. They didn't undo the nerfs, so
Yeah,
we're just
true.
not going to play it anymore. But
Yeah.
from a lot of people, that's probably a good thing because they were fed up with playing it. So
Yeah, so right now
fine with
in
it.
like early sims that we've done, which we've just been redoing because they also nerfed Psychic Link recently. With that and a couple other changes, we're not seeing Idol of Yasharaj do kind of anything useful. So you kind of ignore these 3 talents in most builds these days. So yeah, kind of sucks if you're a fan of that playstyle, but yeah. So yeah, okay. So let's move on. Other negatives to talk about. I think we already covered the top section of the tree. Let's see. Anything else that sticks out to you that you want to cover?
I mean, there's the shadow crash that I just mentioned. You want to
Oh,
have your point on it and why it's actually bad
yeah. So
or good?
one of the problems with, or I guess today on live, the way that we handle dots, we kind of have you have some options, right? Once you apply dots today on live, either with shadow crash, manually dotting, or whatever, you can sustain those dots in a couple ways, either with void bolt, if you're inside of void form, or the other option is mental decay helps you sustain dots in AoE especially with Mind Sear. Well, with the loss of Mind Sear, we're kind of running into this problem like, how do we handle dot management in AoE? And so their answer to that was to give us Shadow Crash on a 20-second cooldown. So that's good in some ways because that means you can use Shadow Crash to sustain dots on 8 targets, right? Problem solved, effectively. The issue is, outside of that and the Void Bolt extension, which you still have if you're inside of Void form, that's all you have, other than manually dotting. This is going to be fine for players that are good at aiming Shadow Crash or predicting where the tank is moving, or, are okay manually dotting to, like, make up the gap. But I think for a majority of players, relying on a projectile spell to, like, get our AoE rolling will be seen as, like, a frustrating point for a lot of people. Especially like you have to hit it once, yes, but then you have to keep hitting it every 20 seconds on that stack of mobs if you're not inside of cooldowns, which is different than today when you basically just had to use it for the start of a pull, and then you could kind of self-sustain yourself more or less. But yeah, as I'm sure a lot of people know, like, aiming Shadow Crash can be kind of tricky if you're on a staircase or if your camera's in a weird spot or whatever. So yeah, they haven't quite answered that problem, and I wish, like, you still have mental decay in the new talent tree, but it doesn't work in AoE. It only increases dots on that one target that you're hitting with Mind Flare, Mind Spike. It doesn't actually do anything with Psychic Link or AoE or anything. So yeah, I think Shadow Crash is in a good spot. Like, I mean, you could adjust it slightly, like maybe make it 30-second cooldown with 2 charges instead. Like, that's definitely an option. But I think, like, what they've done is fine, but I think they need additional options for sustaining dots, whether making mental decay work with shadowy apparitions, so every time a shadowy apparition hits a target, it also extends dots. There's other things they could do as well, but yeah, that's kind of my general thoughts. It's gonna be, I think, frustrating for a lot of people. So
Yeah,
they're gonna have to
I
figure it out.
agree. And to continue on why I said what I said a minute ago, why I think it being split into two talents is actually just good. I it By splitting it into two talents, the value of Shadow Crash has now been split up so that it's a reasonably balanced node per point, which actually gives us more options, especially for like 1, 2, 3 target sims, not sims, 1, 2, 3 target encounters, especially in raid. We have a lot more options now with not taking Shadow Crash because it has been divided into several pieces and made it so that you don't want it on single target. If it was like the numbers we had before, you would take it always, and it would just eat 2 points up, or 1 point, however many it took, and it would just be always thrown every 20 seconds. There would be no gameplay.
Yeah.
There would be no casting vampiric touch. There would be nothing to do about dots other than throw Shadow Crash precisely timed. You had to throw it exactly timed, and if you messed that up, dots would fall off and it would feel awful. I am very, very glad that this isn't the case and we don't have to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky gameplay thing, right? Because I don't think we want to say you never cast dots anymore. Like, I don't think that would be fun. But I do think there's a use case of saying, like, there's some middle ground there of, like, I also don't want to cast a manual dot on a target more than once. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's, like, the middle ground for me. And occasionally, like, if you miss Shadow Crash or if you're pulling more than 8 targets, you will hit that. Some people are fine with that, but I don't think it's for everyone. But yeah, to your point, I think the fact that we don't take Shadow Crash anymore on single target is an absolute win. So on some ways, Shadow Crash has definitely gotten better. It's solved some problems, but in the absence of Mind Sear, they've kind of created other problems as well. So yeah, that doesn't feel great. I think one thing to cover, we didn't cover it too much yet. It's not necessarily a negative, but I'm curious to get your thoughts in general on, like, the AoE playstyle. So now that we've removed Mind Sear, I mean, I've kind of talked a little bit about what that means from, like, a dot management perspective, but what are your thoughts in general about going away from Mind Sear into this Psychic Link playstyle. And I know a lot of people have asked, well, like, have the nerfs changed much of that? So curious on your thoughts on it.
So do like I think the general change from mindset to the current version doesn't really change very much at all. It does quite slightly affect our damage breakdown. Like we're going to be doing more damage to one target than we are to the rest of the monsters in the pack, so we have a slightly higher priority damage, similar to the Searless builds on live servers. We have similar priority damage for those builds, and it doesn't really therefore change very much. But there's the times when you just can't dot like every monster effectively. They very rarely happen in raid, thankfully. At least on times that are frequently enough so that you can't shadow crash them. So in raid, it's less of a concern, but in dungeons, there's usually one or two dungeons a season where there's just going to be like a 12 mob pull.
Yeah.
I think in Freehold there is going to be a 12 mob pull. I think the first pull in Freehold is like 9 or 10 off the top of my head. It's been a while since BFA, but Freehold, for example, like definitely has a couple.
Yep.
Underrot, you can pull most of the room with the ticks in it, for example. Like those pulls are going to not feel great, especially those tick pulls because they're ticks, they die very quickly. So that's gonna feel bad. Like the fact that you're gonna have to manually dot two enemies and shadow crash, that's not so bad. But it's when you get really high numbers. For example, in the academy pulls, it's not gonna feel great at all. It's gonna feel worse actually, and that's a concern. However, there's also the side point that we don't necessarily have to be good at everything, and so it's fine going forwards. But I would like them to readdress it in the future that we now have to that we rely on dots to do damage. We literally do not do any damage to things that do not have dots. I would like them to readdress this in the future. However, for now, I'm not too concerned. I just would like them to keep it on them in their minds. Now, to address specifically the recent change to Psychic Link, they nerfed Psychic Link from 40% to 30% in the recent patch for this week. That has reduced our AoE damage by approximately 7-8%. This is not the end of the world. Our AoE damage is still more than acceptable. In fact, it's not even just acceptable, it's exceptional.
It's very good.
We were really strong on AoE before. Like, it was unfair strong. Now we're still just pretty good. So, we're fine. We are definitely fine. However, the thing that has been nerfed that I was looking forward to from the previous versions is when we have Mind Sear and we were able to do burst AoE to adds and raids, when they converted us to Psychic Link, we maintained that ability because Psychic Link with the 40% number, with Void Torrent and with Devouring Plague, gave us the same, effectively, the burst as Mind Searing the ads would have done. Except we didn't even get slightly more out of it for Mastery. They did nerf the Void Torrent and the Psychic Link numbers specifically, like slightly, so they ended up being slightly worse on Void Torrent than before. But now with this change, our burst AoE is considerably worse. If you need to kill a set of ads really quickly, we're now not that good at it. Well, we're fine, but we're no longer exceptionally good at it. And this is really noticeable in the Mythic Plus, when you walk up to a pack and you have to burst and kill things. Our burst is just worse. Our sustain is insane still though, because a lot of our sustain damage is coming from rolling effects like N'Zoth. It's coming from Yogg-Saron, it's coming from Cthulhu Tentacles. It's coming from things that require us to get established to start doing, whereas the burst is coming from pressing Shadow Crash, pressing Devouring Plague, pressing Void Torrent, pressing Devouring Plague. Very simple, very straightforward, and you can press a Mind Games. Like, it's a simple combination of sequence that you could always do, and it would have just done very good damage. That has been nerfed by 25%.
Yeah. It's effectively like Mind Sear allowed us to spend our insanity really quickly, right? So that's the burst that you're talking about. Like, you could effectively empty your insanity bar, or even back-to-back with a Mind Devourer proc, and that was a lot of bursts that we got out of that. We traded that for Devouring Plague, quote-unquote, working in AoE with Psychic Link. But that means Devouring Plague needs to finish its ticks, right? Which is not burst. That's 6 seconds at least.
Over half of it's up front at least. It hits really hard up front at least.
True, yeah. So that's what you're saying is like we lost enough of that to where, you know, it might be somewhat awkward if you need to do any of those bursty things, right? So.
It was fine with 40%, with 30%, you can feel it now. It now is noticeably worse than before.
Yeah, and I do think it's a good point of saying, like, while Psychic Link is one of the main ways we do AoE, we do have things like Idol N'Zoth and Yogg-Saron, which do maybe throw a wrench into things a little bit, because I do wonder if they were kind of balancing it around our total damage that we're doing right now, including Yogg procs, and they're kind of like, well, easiest way is let's just nerf Psychic Link, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see where things end up. I think it is. I think right now, to TLDR, what you're saying, we're still in a great spot, right? I think the question mark for me comes down to what if they need to buff our single target, or what if they need to buff just our AoE, or just, you know what I mean? Like that knob is now shared, or they have a lot of those components that are now shared. So, going into that, we'll have to kind of see how that plays out from a like overall balancing perspective. No one knows how that's going to work out, but yeah, we'll see what they can do with it. Okay, so before we kind of hit on some topics on the new raid, anything else that we want to cover from like a rework perspective?
No, I mean I think we've kind of hit most of the important points. But the idols all pretty much feel better, and Zoth didn't really get changed, and Yashai just incredibly boring still. But
Yeah.
they fixed basically all of our concerns with the Yogg-Saron, they fixed all of our concerns with Cthulhu. Oh, we basically didn't mention it. Just briefly then. Yogg-Saron now works with Mastery.
Oh, it works with a lot more than
Clap,
just
clap, 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 clap,
mastery.
clap, 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 clap. And the rest of our kit too. It's
Yeah.
great. Yogg-Saron, if you've played any PTR, you've seen any logs, hits real hard, does lots of damage, it's great. And it now has a better AoE split mechanic than it did before, and it does really nice damage in keys. Also, they're not the same number and key, so that you don't have to add two things up. It helps a lot in making it feel good.
Yeah, it's now one spell when Yogg-Saron casts
Yep.
this little void spike, I think. It's
Yeah.
all combined into the damage log as one spell, so make details easier to look at. But yeah, Yogg-Saron super juiced, which is cool. Yeah, I was kind of surprised they made that change. It was like a 60% buff or something to the guy. Works
It
with
was crazy.
all of our stuff now, which is great.
He now slaps. It feels good.
He now
When you
slaps.
see him spawn, you can feel him spawn. It's good.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll mention just very briefly, we're still figuring out what this looks like. Like I said, they just nerfed Psychic Link recently. As a part of that, they also buffed a talent called Mastermind, which is a new talent they added in 10.1. Early stuff still looks like Mastermind's not going to be worth taking single target, but some multi-target scenarios or even dungeons, it might see some play. So we're still figuring that out. So, stay tuned. Check out the Discord for more things on that. But yeah, just note that talent actually might see some use. Maybe. We'll see. Okay, so let's talk about the raid. And I think kind of similar to the raid, before we get into like how does Shadow feel in the raid, kind of boss fights in general, we got to hit on the tier set first. I know you have quite strong feelings about how our tier set is power wise. So let's talk about like how like power it like is it even good?
It sucks.
It sucks. There you go. That's it. We're done.
Moving on. We can probably elaborate a little.
Yeah. So let me see. I'll pull up. The Sims are a little out of date since with the recent change, but it was roughly like 8% on single target with the 2 and 4 set, and then on AoE it can get better in like sustained multi-target. Like I was actually seeing like almost 10%, if you can believe it, in 4 target. But the really, really crappy part with the way that the set works and kind of travel time of apparitions and all that stuff, it was like less than 5% damage in keys. So yeah, it's not great. I think it's kind of we traded a tier set that was interactive for one that doesn't really change up how we want to play necessarily, but does open up build viability. So I think design wise, the tier is good in that sense. But the numbers just aren't there, basically.
Yeah, it's just a bit weak. Based on what other specs seem to have, they seem to have roughly 4-5% for their 2 pieces, and then 8 to 10% for their 4 piece. There's a lot of specs that have crap tier pieces like us, but I'd like to say like a lot of the good specs right now have tier sets that are between 10 and 15%, that rough range. So like Evoker, Warlock, 2 specs of Warlock.
Yeah.
There's also other ones as well. Like I just can't name them all off the top of my head. But those are the obvious ones that are immediately apparent from playing. You can see that tested that good.
Yeah, and I guess like to kind of put a pin in it, right? Like I don't really care if every tier set is 8%. Like then this is fine, right? Or if every tier set's in this like 8 to 10% range or whatever, like that's okay. I think where it makes it hard for me is when some people literally have tier sets that are twice as good as ours. That's when it's like, okay, are we too low? Is their tier set too good? Maybe a bit of both. So yeah, hopefully we have time to tune that. But yeah, especially in Mythic Plus, the tier set is just not super valuable, I guess. Especially now with the Psychic Link nerf, I actually imagine it's going to get even worse. So we're still testing with that. But yeah.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on the tier set you want to give?
I mean, slight concerns to do with like loot allocation in higher end guilds, maybe even lower end guilds where they do DPS based loot allocation. Because our tier set is just not going to sim very high.
Sure.
Like you're going to run your normal raid, you're going to run your like heroic raid. Maybe you'll get given the pieces that you get given, but if you don't run splits in most guilds, so that the number of pieces that you're going to get dropping is just potentially not going to be enough. The two pieces isn't going to be worth putting on to losing a four piece. You're going to have to get a full four piece to put on the entire thing, and when you put on the entire thing, it's going to be not even really a gain. It'd be like a 1 to 2% gain at the same eye level from normal. And if you use heroic pieces, you'll get the eye level boost as well. But you're not really looking at getting much.
Yeah.
Whereas, other specs are going to be like putting on their 4 piece and then going up 10% on the damage on the meters.
Yeah.
It's feels bad. Feels bad. Very bad.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. All right. Well, again, that's something, tweaking numbers is something we could still see. I doubt we'll see any design changes either to the talent tree or tier set, but, numbers tweaks definitely still on the table. So fingers crossed. Okay, let's talk about the raid. So did you do any raid testing? I forget.
No.
Okay.
I didn't realize I was going to be playing next tier until literally this week, but now I'm playing this tier again. So,
nice.
Yay.
There you go. Are you playing Shadow? No.
I am playing Shadow for once.
Sure
I'm not playing
I was saying,
Disc.
sure it's not Disc? I mean, just, it's starting as Shadow.
I mean,
at least.
I think I'm not going to get gaslit into playing Disc this time.
Okay.
Like, last time I played Shadow, I did get gaslit into playing Disc very quickly.
Yeah, it happened. Yeah, I think this is one of the first tiers I've had where actually, it happened in Castle Nathri as well. I played every single spec this tier for, like, the first prog kill. Really cool. Really cool. Okay, so Aberrus the Shadowed Crucible. So we kind of asked around. I did just a little bit of raid testing, but not nearly as much as other people. So we did get some opinions from Jarv, our resident Shadow Priest expert, from a rating perspective. So we'll kind of go over some of his thoughts and we can talk about it as well. But just to start off, like, how is Shadow feeling in the raid? The short answer is it's good. I think in general right now, like what we're seeing, again, tuning is certainly not final, but range specs in general seem to be performing well in the raid, just as a whole. So Shadow is a part of that. I would say we are not the top of the top tier damage by any means, but because we're a ranged DPS, we're pretty competitive in that sense. I'd say we're like mid to upper mid of ranged DPS, which kind of puts us in the upper tier of overall damage, if that makes sense. So our single target is decent. Again, if you're looking at all DPS, it's fine. Where it gets a little less cool is when you start comparing it to like Warlock and Evoker single target. That's where things start to fall off. But we still are doing competitive enough single target. And then really where I think Shadow shines the most is cleave, especially sustained cleave. There isn't a whole bunch of that inside the raid, but things like Forgotten Experiments on Mythic, the Invasion boss has quite a lot. Skarn is really, really strong. And then Neltharion Phase 2, Phase 3. So all of those things are looking pretty good. So I do think this tier will be pretty good for us. I don't know if it'll be necessarily, like the best tier we've ever had, but it does seem like there are more places for us to shine than Vault of the Incarnates had. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Saeldur, but from what you've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, PI is pretty good. Chat is correct here. PI is pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. From what I've seen on all the multi-target fights, we were like just the top. It wasn't close. That's why we got nerfed.
That's why we got nerfed. Yeah.
So post nerf, should be a bit more fair. But the multi-target fights are definitely where we excel as a class. But our single target right now is just really good.
Yeah.
Maybe by the time the tier comes out, we're not going to be like above average so much or exceptional anymore. But we still have PI and we still bring useful utility on, especially for cleave fights and stuff like that. I think Jerv mentioned the final fight could have some ants in the first phase that we could be very good at killing.
Yep.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, so we haven't, if you guys didn't know, raid testing was not open up for the last boss. So we just have to kind of like, from reading the dungeon journal, like how will it fare? Because generally speaking, any fight that has ads, especially for a sustained amount of time, Shadow's going to do pretty well on. So it's looking like the last boss has some of that, which is definitely good. Where the, and I guess when we finish positives, I guess, on the point with power infusion, so it's still like the best raid, single point of raid utility a spec can bring from like a throughput perspective. Power infusion is incredible. And this tier, I think especially, power infusion is basically buffed, right?
Yeah.
And like I mentioned before, ranged DPS as a whole are performing pretty well right now. This includes, notably, basically all 3 specs of Warlock and Devastation Evoker. The important part with those 2 specs being so good, all of those guys, well, I think every Warlock spec, you know more than me, really likes power infusion. And a lot of them are also like getting on a 2-minute cycle as well. So power infusion itself didn't change, but because of the relative strength of the people that we're going to give it to, we have a lot of good options for power infusion now, which effectively, make us look better too. So there's mages are another good example. So you have quite a lot of, I think like Unholy Death Knight is still great.
Unholy is good.
So I think you'll still see like Unholy on pull, especially with like Lust, but then like Evoker on 2 minutes, Warlocks on 2 minutes, very strong as well. So that's the notable part about Evoker and Warlock, is I think they like it better on the 2-minute cycle, where Mage isn't always like that. So
Demonology is a 3-minute spec on 10.1. However, I did some recent experiments to look into this, and you can force the Warlock to play 2-minute timers, and that is a gain for the raid DPS specifically.
If they're getting PI.
If they're getting PI versus not getting PI at all. So if we were to play 3-minute timers, first things first, we have to stop playing Void Film when we have to play Dark Ascension.
Yep.
This is a DPS hit.
Yep.
It's also a mobility hit. It doesn't feel great. And that DPS loss is bigger than the DPS loss that the Warlock loses from going from a 3-minute class, a 90-second class to a 2-minute class specifically. They are a 90-second class. It just ends up being that their 3-minute burn is the big burn. But we can force them to play 2 minutes and then 4 minutes on their portal, and we just give them power infusions on those timers, and it's still the best PI basically in the game.
There you go.
On a 2-minute cycle. It's competitive with Evokers by the same. It's basically the same percentage as an Evoker, except their baseline numbers is 10,000 higher because Warlock is extremely balanced right now.
So
good God.
But that does mean if Warlocks get changed or something, there are still plenty of other good targets for power infusion, at least right now.
Plenty.
Which is good. Like that, as much as people will meme on power infusion and you can not like it, it does mean bringing an extra priest to the raid does give a lot of benefit to the raid team, which does feel good. So,
if you take our good single target and you add the PI bonus, we are basically one of the best specs, if not the best spec. We're like Warlock tier if you include the PI. Yeah. It's quite nice.
Yeah. So obviously not everyone's they just want to see big numbers. They don't necessarily care about overall raid damage, but yeah, if you factor in PI, massive. Okay, so let's talk about the negatives in a raiding environment, because there are some notable exceptions to the positives that we're talking about. I think the biggest one here is just movement. So we've already talked about this quite a bit, but as we mentioned before, Shadow does not have as many tools now for handling movement, right? We lost Surge of Darkness. Our Insanity Generation lowered our kind of in general how many instant casts we're getting out with Devouring Plagues. So any fight that has a lot of movement, Shadow will struggle on. We are a bit more of a turret class than we have been in the past. Some things have helped out with that. Some things have not. So I think fights like Magmarax, Neltharion P1, even Razshock to a certain extent are going to feel kind of poopy. Because you're getting a lot of forced movement mechanics on those fights that you can't really afford to pre-plan your movement and that kind of thing. That's still the biggest kind of nail in the coffin, so to speak, for Shadow Priest inside of a raiding environment is movement. Like we mentioned, this is a solvable problem, right? They can easily make this a whole lot better if they made Mind Spike Insanity instant cast. That would already do a lot. Mind Flay Insanity castle moving could be an option, and then giving us something like Door of Shadows or Vault of the Heavens to kind of fill the gap, so to speak, with our movement. Any of those changes, or all of them, would do a lot of making us, be able to handle those situations, or at least be able to plan ahead for them. I think that, I don't know what you think, Saeldur, but I think that my favorite one would just be making Mind Spike Insanity instant cast. I think that would be my favorite one to do.
Yeah, that's definitely my favorite one. I mentioned that before, but unfortunately, you're missing out the best mobility tool that we have access to. The best mobility tool we have access to is called talking to your teammates and saying, "Please, please rescue me."
Oh yeah,
Sir,
rescue.
I cannot walk. Please rescue me.
True, actually, yeah.
You have the trade deal. I give you PI. You rescue me around the bus.
You're so right, actually. Yeah, just add more evokers into your raid, and then your movement's fine. There's no problem. That's funny. Yeah, trade rescues for PI. I love it. Crazy. So yeah, overall, I think the raid's looking like positive for us. I do think there are some, like, if they can show up our movement, I think it'll be an amazing tier to play a Shadow Priest. So, yeah. Anything else on the raid you wanted to cover?
I just don't know enough to say anything like good, useful, or definitive. Raid looks like a raid. We're gonna go hit things inside the raid. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I think one thing, just a little bit, just to cover it. A lot of people are saying the raid has a lot of single target in it, which is true. There is quite a bit of single target, and they're like, man, Shadow single target sucks. That is definitely not the case anymore. Like, it's gotten better. So I do want to clear that up a little bit. I know a lot of people are just thinking of like the current tier, but our single target is quite competitive. So it should be a good tier for us if things stay the same. So. Okay, that is kind of all that I have for topics, unless there's something you want to bring up. Otherwise, we can go Q&A.
One thing I just remembered.
Yeah.
They changed healers. They did the healing
Ooh,
rebalance.
yes, they did. Do you want to specifically say what that was?
So they rebalanced healers by increasing the HP on everybody by 25% and increasing the damage we're going to take by 25% effectively. I mean, they buffed monster damage by 25%, not how much we take. But this means people's HPs there's more health to heal. Like, healers have to work harder to do the same thing they did previously. So there's going to potentially just be less full HP people lying around in the raid, which is going to improve the fact that Vamp Embrace exists for us. We didn't mention the nerf to Vamp Embrace. There's a Vamp Embrace change, but Vamp Embrace is going to be better in the raid because they'll actually be able to heal stuff, and also just using Divine Star or Halo to heal is also going to be more effective because there's going to be a higher chance that you can use it for that.
Yeah.
Would you like to do the Vamp Embrace nerf though?
Yeah. So the Vamp Embrace nerf, if you're not aware, and again, we always kind of thought this was unintended, but they left it. So every hit of Psychic Link was counting towards Vampiric Embrace healing, which basically meant on any multi-target, if you were playing a focus build around Psychic Link, which is all of your AoE next tier, you did a monstrous amount of healing. It's still like, and now they've removed that. So any damage from Psychic Link specifically is not contributing towards Vampiric Embrace. That's a pretty massive nerf, at least to our healers. So couple that with the change to healers in general and giving us more health, things hitting harder. They did not compensate that with a Vamp Embrace buff. So yeah, I'm a little worried at how useful that becomes. But yeah, it's I mean, we always have the leech option if it ends up being crap, but I do think in the hands of a good Shadow Priest that uses it at the right time, I think you'll still see better value out of VE, but TBD. Leech is also pretty nice in Mythic Plus, so yeah.
I mean, yeah, and to be fair, despite those nerfs with the Psychic Link, it's still going to be really good in keys. A lot of our damage is not coming from Psychic Link, it's coming from pressing Devouring Plague and just doing damage with it. It's coming from the dots ticking, it's coming from all of those other sources that still will count.
Yeah.
The only things that don't count are pets and now Psychic Link, pretty much, and trinkets and all that. So, still going to be good. Yeah. It's just, you can no longer press Void Torrent and lay on hands the group 10 times over during the Void Torrent cast.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. That was fun.
That was pretty fun. You just tell your healer, like, it's okay, I got this pull. You're good. Just,
you're good.
You can DPS now. I got it.
You could. Like, you legitimately could. Like, you go into a hard pull with Vamp Embrace and Void Torrent, and you just heal it, go AFK, I got this.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty sick.
It was great.
So yeah, now to be fair, there were other things like ancestral guidance, also got effectively nerfed with this change as well, although not as hard as we got hit. So I think in general they're trying to make it so that healers have to heal more. So you saw some of that hit us as well with this. Our self healing is effectively a little nerfed as well. Kind of a shame. But as part of this, we did get more health. So they gave us, is it 20% more health? 25%?
Yep.
Which
25% more HP.
yeah, which means mental fortitude is actually better, or it scales, right?
Yep.
So that's really nice. Although again, good luck taking it without losing damage. That part still sucks.
You just drop silence. You don't need silence in raid
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, kick. Yeah, who needs it? Yeah, for sure. Yep, yep, for sure. Sweet. All right, so I think that's it for the things that we wanted to cover for sure.
Yeah, that was pretty much it.
So yeah, we can do a few Q&A stuff just to close out here, but I think, yeah, any questions you guys have in chat that we didn't cover, or questions you guys have about how things look so far? Let's see if anyone.
There's also some nitty-gritty stuff we can cover on like rotation related stuff and like distorted reality especially.
Oh yeah, while we wait for questions to come in, do you want to cover distorted reality? It's a good one.
Yeah, so recent, like not so recent, like what is it, 3 weeks ago now, they changed distorted reality again, buffing it. This made distorted reality good. Distorted reality is now good. It is a single target DPS loss. It is not a significant single target DPS loss, especially with Dark Ascension. It's a pretty significant loss with Void Form
Yep.
due to the negative synergies with Void Form and Screams and Tear Set. Like, it still has all the negative synergies, to be completely honest with you. It still has
It's
all
like
of them.
8%
They
with
haven't
void
gone
form or
away.
something.
It's just good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just now kind of good because of what it does. Now, what does that mean? That means on 2 target fights, we're probably going to play Dark Ascension. So not Dark Ascension, we're probably going to play Distorted Reality, not Dark Ascension. We don't play Void Form, obviously. But we're going to play Distorted Reality on like 2 target fights because now we can have the Devouring Plague on both of the targets like 80% of the time, which with Phantasmal Pathogen is quite good. And then on high movement fights, we haven't fully looked into this, so pay attention in the Discord if this ends up being not true or true and I'm lying at my ass. But this should be good on high movement fights, because you can put Devouring Plague on the target, you can do the movement, and your Devouring Plague will still be on the target when you finish your movement. You're not going to waste it, because one of the common things with Shadow right now is using Devouring Plague to move. When you use Devouring Plague to move, you are moving. You can't follow it up with damage spells that you want to capitalize on. But with a Distorted Reality, you're going to finish your movement, and it's still going to be up. This is a good thing. It's also going to be really good for players that just aren't as good. It's fine. You exist. But some people have difficulties maintaining the high percentage uptime that Devouring Plague has, especially in Sims and in the hands of highly skilled players. High skilled players can still get well over 90% uptime on Devouring Plague with a normal build. However, if you're not one of those, or if, like I said, there's movement or other mechanics making the fight more difficult for you to play, just click Distorted Reality, you will have 100% uptime on Devouring Plague, basically without trying. You can technically drop it, but it's extremely hard to drop it.
Yeah, so I think basically sustained multi-target is going to be the go-to for a lot of people of like that's when you should start picking up distorted reality. So I think like Forgotten Experiments might be one of the like a good example with this inside of the raid. Maybe a few others. I guess we'll see how some of the other fights work out, but I think that one specifically will be one of the big ones. And then yeah, so Dark Ascension is not like the big single target build. Like Void Form is outperforming it by a couple thousand DPS, I think. But if you do want to run Destroyed Reality on a single target, you can. And again, it's bridging that gap like you mentioned. So it's just the modifier to DP damage is really nice as well. And we're just stacking modifiers in Devouring Plague. So yeah. I don't know if I simmed. I was just rerunning the sim. I was trying to check. I don't see the Destroyed Reality build popping up. Yeah, I guess I don't know the numbers here, but
it was like quite a way down. Cause I think it first popped up with DA, like -4% or something like that, because it has to pay DA first, and that's the problem.
Yeah, the drop with Void Form is like 8 or 9%. That one's pretty significant. I don't think I added Dark Ascension single target build. So yeah, it's kind of up to what you want, but I think to your point, like if you're in a world where you're not playing optimally, it might be a gain for you to do that, right? Because it is giving you more uptime at Devouring Plague, which is effectively unlocking the rest of our kit to work properly, right? So,
yeah, we've previously complained about a lack of a introduction-friendly or beginner-friendly version of Shadow Priest, and this is what that is. Maybe this isn't what this is meant to be, but it is this.
Yeah.
if you are new to Shadow Priest, this is great for you. It makes the class significantly easier to play.
Yep.
I think we've got some questions in chat, Pub. Would you like to take them?
Yeah, let's see. The first one, will the recording be available? Yes, you can watch it in the stream VOD. Otherwise, it'll be on YouTube probably tomorrow. Warlock name recommendations. I can't help you there, Chief. What's the general rotation like in raid and in keys? Don't really have time to go over the entire in-depth rotation, but you're not going to see a whole lot of very large changes. I think there's definitely some like priorities of spells that will be moved around a little bit. But in terms of how it plays, it's not really that different. I don't know if there's anything big you want to call it, Sailor, but yeah.
I can call them out after you've answered all the questions, and I can do a quick tour through a little bit of section I wrote down. I can do that while we're waiting for more questions.
Yeah, okay, so let's see. Why does it feel like all class devs are locked in a classroom, disconnected from feedback, and making changes at random? So I think it can be really hard and frustrating when you're looking at these changes, but I think, again, the developers are not just making changes that I want to see or Sailor wants to see or the people posting feedback. They do have to take into account the entire game, which is a much harder task for sure. So, and again, I think part of it just comes down to like what they have time for. Definitely feels like we had a lot of changes at the start of the rework, but then they were kind of focused in on other things. But we did see notable improvements. It's just we're always going to want more, right? Which can make it hard. Let's see. I saw a couple questions about dungeons, so sorry if I didn't cover this at the top. But the next podcast, so hopefully next week, we're going to hopefully have that one be more focused on Mythic Plus. Invite some people that have done a bunch of high keys. Maybe if Twix is available, I'd love to get him on to chat. So yeah, more Mythic Plus details to come out hopefully next week. Let's see. But is Void Form dead versus DA? Oh, we kind of talked about that a little bit. But yeah, for the most part, Void Form is the popular choice is what I'll say. I think there are definitely moments where Dark Ascension will make sense. I think it really depends on the pull cadence and when you need damage, basically. You'll still see like if there is a fight that needs damage at every minute or on like a 3-minute window or something, that's when you'll see Dark Ascension come into play. And we've seen, as we've done early dungeon sims, we've seen that take into effect already, where it's like, oh yeah, this is, running Dark Ascension here makes more sense over Void Form. But it's, I think dominantly you're going to see if you can make Void Form work, it'll be better. Let's see. Let's see. Will Priest be substantially? Will Shadow Priest be substantially strong in melee range and keys? No, I don't think like standing in melee like could be a gain at the end of a pull, but it's not something that you need to play around that much, for most people at least. I mean, if you're standing at 40 yards, you might lose a bit at the end of the pack when like you're effectively waiting on travel time of your spirits. But yeah. Let's see. Okay, so for single target, the autos we're going to play are mostly going to be Cthulhu and Yogg. Yes, that's generally speaking, Cthulhu's going to be, you're going to take it quite almost all the time, just with the way the builds work out. Yogg makes a lot of sense, again, almost all the time. Although inside of keys, or as you get into multi-target, that's where triple idol builds will show up, where you can run N'Zoth, Yogg, and Cthulhu. Or even some combinations of even dropping Yogg inside of keys, running Dark Ascension, N'Zoth, Cthulhu. That's also a competitive build as well, depending on what you're looking for. Oh yeah, another point on build diversity. I don't know if we covered it too much at the start. I think we were when we were having problems with the lag. Let me see. Do I still have? Yeah, let me pull this up. Pull up my let's see, webcam. This guy. So one thing to talk about with the builds, you have a lot more flex points in this middle section than we had in the past. So specifically, if you kind of make a reverse L here, for a lot of builds, it's going to look something like, if we just talk about single target, it'll be something like this is what you'll take all the time. And then you basically have, and usually Ancient Madness as well, although it's, it's not definitely not as good as it used to be. But typically builds like Ancient Madness. So with this, we need, what is it? Several more points to get down. I think it's 6 or 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6. Yeah.
6.
So you have quite a bit of flex here. It does kind of depend on what you're going to be going for idle wise, because obviously if you want to get down to N'Zoth or something, you might need to path differently. But just this right here opens up quite a bit of the tree in the bottom section to where if you want more single target, it's like, cool, take Phantasmal Pathogen, Mental Decay, Mind Devourer usually, although you could even do Maddening Touch as well. And you kind of have a bit of flex here. And if you want to say, yeah, I'm okay dropping a bit of single target, maybe you go more into Maddening Touch, something like that. Dark Evangelism is a nice like overall damage point. So there is some flex here. Void Touch is one that comes in and out sometimes. It's more about like, can you like bank up Insanity to like get better burst on something basically. Use cases are kind of slim there, but it's definitely possible. So you have more build diversity in this middle section than we've ever had for sure. Especially in keys. Like if we go like a typical build inside of keys, let's see. Usually it's something like that, and then we'll assume we'll take whoops, I think it was, yeah, just 1 point there. Mental Decay is kind of an option. Usually like 2 points of Maddening is pretty good as well. Something like this is pretty standard, and then we go, you know, Yogg-Saron, Cthulhu, something like this. This is a popular one. You can also drop Ire to go triple idle build. And with this, you can be like, oh yeah, I actually want more single target. It's like, cool. Then you pick up Phantasmal Pathogen. You can drop Maddening Touch instead. That's, you know, up there. Mental Decay, again, you can do that too. Drop 1 point of Mind Devour. So depending on what you're looking for, if it's like a tyrannical week or whatever, you have quite a bit of flexibility in just this middle section here, which is cool. So, oh yeah, someone was asking, so if you're in a 2 idle build, you see we have this like 1 point of flex down here. Generally speaking, the Sims like running Screams to the Void as this last point, although you can drop it for Death Speaker if you have, I don't have it open here, but something like this is usually, you can do that 1 point in Death Speaker as well, for movement mostly. It's not really a damagey thing. And then yeah, there's also N'Zoth Cthulhu builds which pop up occasionally. Those usually look something like this. And then what am I missing? Is it that? Something like that, yeah.
I think that speaker. I
Yeah.
think that was like the last point.
So this is also an option, and we've also, like I said recently, we've been experimenting with. There's actually some stuff with running Mastermind here instead, but we're still figuring that out. Something like that. We'll see. Will this be on YouTube? Yep, uploaded in a couple days. Otherwise, the VOD's on Twitch. Yeah, Mastermind changes, they just buffed the crap out of it over and over again. That's just kind of that's what's happened. I think the struggles with Mastermind is that it's leading into Idol of N'Zoth, but it has no synergy with Idol of N'Zoth. And when you get to this bottom section of the tree, the goal here is being point efficient. You don't want to path towards something that doesn't make any sense. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting points here. So, like, for example, if you were to pick up Mastermind, but then not actually go into N'Zoth, like, you know, what's the point? And Mastermind kind of struggles because Screams is pretty good. So that was already one of the ways we got into N'Zoth. So yeah, kind of in an awkward spot in the tree, basically, and doesn't have any synergy with N'Zoth, which really hurts it, especially on single target where N'Zoth already isn't good. So, let's see. Are we basically useless when huge packs of low health mobs come through? I think Saeldur, you covered this already a little bit. I wouldn't say we're useless, but it's you know, it's harder for sure. Like
Yeah.
we can't just press mines here, right?
Define huge. If it's actually huge, like over like 12, then yeah, we're kind of not great, especially if they're low HP. Especially if there's going to be like follow up ad 10 seconds later or whatever. Like, yeah, you can't really do anything. Especially if there's follow up ads 10 seconds later. Geez, you can't do any damage to those. But
Yeah.
most of the time, we're fine.
Someone mentioned the idols and like in general. I think the one thing we didn't cover, I think we got this kind of rework in 10.1, right? It was not a massive rework. It was more on like a mini scale, if anything. But I still think there's a lot of opportunity for Void Form and Dark Ascension cooldown and identity is still lacking. That needs to get improved. And then idols. I think they did some improvements to idols, but I still think it's not like they're not all in the best spots. So I think for me, like I think Idol of Yogg-Saron and Cthulhu are in pretty good spots. I don't know what you think, Sailor. Um,
Um, yeah, I think everything on the bottom except
yeah,
the basically in a
that's
good point space. N'Zoth single target questionable, but it's good on AoE, so it has a use at least. Yogg
does yeah.
does Yogg things, and then Cthulhu is
Yeah, I think
insane.
N'Zoth, my one point of feedback is like
Uh,
every other idol does single target and does AoE. N'Zoth is the only one that is like hyper AoE focus, and even in AoE, it's not always the best. Um, so that's where I feel like it's a little
yeah,
lacking. Some of that just comes down to tuning, though. But um, and I do think the other thing we haven't seen with N'Zoth that
I
I would still love to see is when you hit 10 stacks, you auto trigger a detonate. Um, as a place.
feel like the big thing for N'Zoth is potentially like making it stronger again on AoE. Like they put a bunch of nerfs on it previously that made
Mm,
it worse on AoE. And don't get me wrong, it's insanely powerful. AoE is like 10% AoE, but our other idols are now also
yeah,
10% each,
yeah,
which makes it why play it when I can play the others and they do single target too. So I think either it needs to somehow do single target,
it'd
which
be
I
hard.
can't see a way of making it do single target in like a good way. So I think it just needs to do some incredibly insane AoE. So like, oh, I'm AoEing, all right, I'm gonna take this off. I want that. I want to be like that,
Well, they
but
could adjust
it's
the
fine.
proc rate. That is one thing we didn't cover. So in this patch, Maddening Touch Insanity and Auspicious Spirit Insanity is now they've applied a new formula to it, or at least new to Shadow. I think it's used in other parts of the game, where the Insanity generation is actually scaling with the amount of targets you're facing. So I wonder if they could do something like that with N'Zoth, right? Which is give it a higher proc rate on a single target, but then as you have more dots out, it lowers. I don't know.
Yeah. They could probably do that and that'll make it a bit healthier as well. They probably need to remove the cap on it and then
Sure.
just make it scale that way at the reduced rate. Because the problem previously was it scaled with targets
Mm.
quadratically. But if you make it have its own formula for scaling, you can make it square root scaled, and then that ends up being
Yeah,
fine
and
at
because
the end of the
you
day.
will see those problems, right?
Or
With
you,
because N'Zoth, you can only have that dot on 4 targets. Like if you're ever facing a pack that
yep,
has mobs that are not all stacked, which like Freehold is a great example, where like you just have range people that don't move in unless you have a Death Knight gripping them in or whatever, or some displacement. If you get a N'Zoth proc on that one mob off in the corner by itself, like you lost a lot of damage, right? Um, so yeah, I wish they yeah. So I think N'Zoth is okay. Yogg and Cthulhu are good, and then I'd say Yasharaj needs the most help for sure.
yeah, it needs the most help, but I'm fine
Yeah,
with not playing it for
yeah,
now.
sure,
Freedom,
sure.
freedom.
Let's see. Any questions that stood out?
I think that possibly just
I
needs a
agree.
rework. I think Inescapable Torment, you charge, you just need a new design.
I
They
agree.
should go for something new, hopefully.
Oh,
Um,
embellishments. We should talk about this briefly. So advice with embellishments is still something we're actively checking. But one thing to keep in mind, if you're just coming back to the game, you haven't crafted anything yet, I would strongly advise avoiding Elemental Lariat. That's like currently one of the top simming or one of the better embellishments that we use. But with 10.1 launching, they're making a change to Elemental Lariat to where the buff duration actually scales with the number of sockets that you have of the same elemental type. Um, so if you have full sockets on everything, so you have all 8 sockets, including the meta gem, you get equivalent value out of Lariat. But then for every socket that you lose, so as you get upgrades in 10.1, you're going to lose value on Lariat effectively. So for a lot of people, Lariat's not going to be great on prog. Obviously, if you have it, it's not like you should take it off immediately when the patch drops. You're just gonna need to sim it and kind of see where that sits relatively to your gear. But mostly just for people like I would not advise crafting it if you haven't already and you don't already have sockets and stuff. Um, as far as like what embellishments we will replace it with, that's something we're still kind of checking. It will definitely depend on your gear and kind of when you get what slots, basically. Because like one of the biggest upgrades with profession gear is not really embellishments. It's just the eye level bump you get from crafting something with ideal stats. So you kind of want to take that as your first step. And then for embellishments, probably use some combination of blue silken lining, either one or two of them, because they do stack, or the new embellishment, the Shadow Flame tempered armor patch or something. Just like a damage proc, basically. So yeah, we'll see. Yeah. Someone asked about stat priority. Nothing changes. Still haste mastery. If anything, you might see more this tier. You might see more people like gemming and enchanting for mastery as we hit like DR thresholds differently, but otherwise nothing's changing. Yeah.
Blue silken
yeah,
stacks.
blue silken lining stats stacks. Shadow Flame tempered armor patch stacks. So
To make blue silken lining stack, you're gonna have to go below 90% HP, then go back above. It doesn't update until you re-trigger the buff effectively.
Is the wand any good? No. Not worth the embellishment slot, basically. I think it'd be better just to craft a weapon, a normal weapon. That's kind of be the answer for a lot of people. Just craft normal tailoring, dual crafting, and weapons, and then figure out your embellishments after. No, even with full sockets and everything, Lariat is not BIS. So it still loses to blue silken lining and Shadow Flame tempered armor patch. So just
the new enchantment, no. It doesn't work on yourself, it only works on other people. So you lose a lot of damage trying to cast heals on other players.
That's the spore
it's
one,
not going
right?
to be worth it.
Because there's a new damage
The
one.
spore one, yeah.
There's
a chest piece one, isn't there?
There's a new weapon damage one, but it's not good. Yeah, it still loses to Sophic or wafting or whatever. Wafting.
I like how they're still very similar despite us being like 38% on haste.
Yeah.
Our next amulet is not needed
don't care
at
about
all.
It. It's already not great for us. It's just gonna get worse in the next patch. So yep. Yeah, so and like the value of Lariat specifically, so getting random secondaries, like it was like good initial value as we were gearing up. But once you start obtaining gear, it's just like it just doesn't scale as well as other things can. So just kind of how it is. And the other big thing, which is still up in the air, there are a lot more good necks as well. I think that was one of the other problems. People were like, yeah, just craft a neck early, and Lariat's a decent enough embellishment, right? We actually have quite a lot of good necklace options. You might not even need to craft a neck next tier, depending on how lucky you get. So
yeah, Lariat's now good later rather than early. They made that change to it, which basically removes that being its niche. You'd rather just craft another necklace or get one from Mythic Plus and upgrade it.
You gotta, and again, embellishments are really minor. I think people make them a much bigger deal than they actually are. Like we're talking like the differences between some of these embellishments are equivalent to differences between different racial effects. Like they're pretty small, so you don't really need to futz about them too much. And again, they all have their downsides, right? Like if you got a Lariat proc after your cooldowns, it sucked that pull. If blue silken lining you got hit during your cooldowns, it sucks, right? Azure Weave set, if you got the proc after your cooldowns, it sucks, right? Like all of these little embellishments. I mean, all of these embellishments have their negatives, have their downsides. They're really flavor items. They're not something you want to get like too worked up about. So
class trinket's very important. You'll want it from any difficulty possible. Significant DPS upgrade. You will run all difficulties every single week for it.
I don't know if that's the case for everyone still, but yeah.
It is not. It's fairly niche in terms of which classes actually want their trinkets. Our trinket is one of the better ones because it's generic and it just procs. So most of the people on our class trinket want it. But for example, the Warlock one, a lot of the classes on that one do not want it. And the AoE one that Evoker uses, I think Evoker is the only class that wants it.
Yeah, so go to trinkets right now.
It's maybe not necessarily correct, but
yeah, so go to trinkets right now, like Saeldur mentioned, class trinket basically always. And then Igneous Flowstone is like usually the second best trinket. And then third is usually Spoils of Nelth something. Spoils of, I don't know.
Whatever it's called.
Spoils of
Spoils or
something.
spoils.
Spoils of Neltharis. So those are your top 3 trinkets basically. And then, but that being said, like as you're gearing up, if you don't quite have those yet, there is actually good value from Vessel of Searing Shadow, Screaming Black Dragon Scale, and Ominous Chromatic Essence as like they're not best in slot trinkets or anything, but they are actually decent. So almost every trinket in the raid, I think besides the trinket out the last boss, is actually pretty competitive for us. So kind of get whatever you can get your hands on. But yeah, the 2 that you're going to be aiming for is Igneous Flowstone and Neltharian's Call of Suffering. So okay, I think that's people had a lot of questions. Dang. Did you still want to cover like rotation stuff? Is that something?
Yeah, a couple of people have brought it up as well since. So to cover on rotation, the opener, so one thing that's probably quite likely is that we'll be playing Divine Star because it's just a movement global as well as being a highly efficient raid healing and just it ends up being a very nice filler spell to have access to despite its melee restrictions. We are in melee quite often, it's not a big deal. Sorry, melee restrictions. It's
20,
more than melee,
24
but
yards.
it's kind of melee. But so what we kind of want to do is use it on pre-pull to get to at least I'd say it's like 12 insanity, like 2 casts, preferably 3 casts of pre-pull insanity. This makes our rotation a lot smoother. Then you're gonna, dot the boss with Vampiric Touch, put down the Mindbender, double Mind Blast, and then Void Eruption, press all cooldowns, and with Bolt. Immediately Devouring Plague, then you just do the rotation from there on. You're gonna press Mind Blast, etc. You're just gonna play the rotation out from there onwards. But the pre-insanity lets you press that Devouring Plague before you press Mind Blast, which gives you Tabardars on it. That's the only reason why you're doing that. Then, in terms of like other rotation things, the rotation has been slightly changed. Whereas we previously wanted to press Devouring Plague basically as soon as we got it in cooldowns and just press Devouring Plague, press Devouring Plague, press Devouring Plague, we now want to just ride the Devouring Plague as long as possible out until we have too much insanity. So we'll either maintain Devouring Plague on the boss or press it when our insanity gets too high. The effect of this basically means that we use our entire insanity pool, which can now be increased to 150 with the talent, as a buffer. We can then play our cooldowns, buffering up as much insanity as we can, so that when cooldowns drop, we can press Devouring Plague for longer and afterwards. And that helps us flow from one set of cooldowns to the next, especially with how we're now a 2-minute class. We're no longer a 1-minute class. We can't go from DA to DA. We no longer have the Mindbender that's doing it. We have to go from 2 minutes to 2 minutes. So the additional pooling lets us extend our easy uptime window from just being cooldowns to being nearly 60 seconds. And then after that, it ends up dropping off a bit more, but after that, we're not doing quite as much damage. Additionally, due to the changes to Yogg-Saron, due to the changes of Cthulhu, due to the changes of Void Torrent, we're now significantly more flat spec. Our cooldowns aren't as spiky. Void Form isn't as spiky and bursty. It's a cooldown window, but it's quite long. And then after that, because of the consistent access to 30-second cooldowns, as well as just Cthulhu procs and Yogg-Saron being so impactful, our damage is significantly higher baseline now outside of cooldowns, so that we no longer quite feel weak anymore outside the CDs. We're now doing a reasonable amount of damage outside of cooldowns, whereas we used to be very famine with the old Dark Ascension charge builds. Without our Mindbender active, we weren't doing damage. Now that's not the case. We are doing damage now outside of cooldowns. Yes, you probably have to have procs active to be doing damage, like a pet up, but those pets are up quite frequently. Now, with Cthulhu specifically, Mindspike Insanity ends up being pretty nice for this, because you just press Mindspike Insanities quite frequently, and they hit really hard, they're really punchy. You just press them a lot. Void Torrent procs Cthulhu tomorrow, we mentioned this earlier, but it gives you the guaranteed proc, but it also counts for procking it. So we have less spells in our... So we have now got more spells in our rotation that can proc it, so we're no longer losing procs just to not pressing spells most often, and it ends up just... We have more tentacles on average. It's quite good. And some people have been asking stuff like, how is our insanity field? Has our insanity been nerfed? Has our Devouring Plague uptime been nerfed? Our insanity has been slightly nerfed per second, but due to the ability to pull it from cooldowns, and due to the things like Cthulhu being buffed, it hasn't really affected our Devouring Plague uptime. It's still around 90%.
With Mind's Eye. by the way.
So
Yeah.
with Mind's Eye, you have to play Mind's Eye. If you play, sorry, don't have to play. If you play Distorted Reality, it is 100%. But Mind's Eye is currently better. Mind's Eye has better interactions with our tier sets and with the void form. You get longer void forms if you take it. You get higher tier set uptime and you get higher extremes of the void uptime. If you take Distorted Reality, the opposite happens and you get lower, and that ends up making it worse significantly enough that you don't play it. Then other things that change our rotation is Yogg. Yogg is why we're playing void form now. Void form, we want things that can trigger shadowy apparitions, so we play void form because void bolt triggers shadowy apparitions.
Yay.
I think that's basically the quick one over on rotation. I think that's the important parts. There'll be more information coming out as we get closer to the raid. I do believe Pub here will be making a video.
I'll do my best, man.
Smile.
But yeah, I think the main thing to call out that might trip up people is I think right now on live you can kind of get away with just pressing DP whenever you get Insanity, right? That is not the case in 10-1. You definitely need to be better about only pressing Devouring Plague, when you need it for uptime reasons, or if you're capping Insanity. But now that we're not capping Insanity as much, you need to be a bit careful. Like, you can't just spam Devouring Plague every time you get 45 Insanity or 55 Insanity. You need to be a bit more careful about that. So I think that'll definitely be something people might not be super used to, or they might need to take Distorted Reality as they get comfortable with it. Because, you really want to focus on the uptime thing. If you just keep pressing it every time you get Insanity, you'll really starve yourself out of damage in between cooldowns. So.
Yeah, we had enough generation before that if you did that, you really didn't suffer, and we had so frequent cooldown windows, you'd get the insanity back very quickly. But now if you do that, you're just gonna drop Devouring Plague, and then you're gonna miss Tabardars on important spells, for example. It's not Tabardars, it's Insidious Eye. It was called Tabardars before. So related to the question about Void Form, you press Devouring Plague near the end of Void Form if pressing Devouring Plague near the end of Void Form will give you another Void Bolt. Otherwise, you have the normal conditions still applied, where you would like to press it whether you're overcapping or whether you just need to refresh it. But you only spend extra Devouring Plagues if you can get a Void Bolt for it, because the Void Bolt is worth it. It's basically, if you have a second left on Void Form, and you can see that the Void Bolt cooldown is going to come off next global, you'll press the Devouring Plague, you press the Void Bolt, and you go back to your normal rotation.
Yeah. Oh, someone asked Dark Ascension. Yeah, I think Dark Ascension will be played on any fight where you want damage every minute. So I think Skarn, is that the one with the trap boss? I think it's Skarn. Wowhead? I think, is Skarn the trap guy? Someone tell me. I think so. He's the one with the golems, right? Yeah. Okay, so Skarn has ads that spawn, and I believe they spawned on a minute cadence. And these ads need to die ASAP. So I think for that fight, Dark Ascension will probably make sense if you need that damage. So yeah, and they're also spread out, depending on the difficulty. I think you can only, Mythic. I think you can't. They can't be CC'd after a certain percentage or something. So.
Yeah, if you don't have DKs to mass grip them to the middle of the room, we're gonna do a lot of damage to them. That'd be nice, but because of that, you'll probably want to run DA and then focus your entire gameplay around killing them for your raid, because we are one of the best specs at doing spread damage. If you have Death Knights to stack them up, you're gonna still want the talents that make you be able to kill them effectively, but you might not necessarily go into DA. You may still have full single target, focus on killing the boss, but just have Shadow Crash so that when they get stacked up, you can Shadow Crash them and kill them. But otherwise, you would just hit the boss and do damage. Because our AoE damage with our single target build is really good. We just have to take Shadow Crash.
Sweet. Okay, we covered a lot of stuff. I want to be respectful of Saeldur's time. I appreciate hanging out for this long. But yeah, we covered quite a bit. Like I mentioned before, the VOD should be up on the Twitch channel if you want to go back and watch it. Otherwise, I'll kind of upload it with all the craziness that happened at the beginning of the stream removed on YouTube later this week. And then, look forward, like I said, we're going to have lots of info coming out over the next couple of weeks. We have some early info already released in the FAQ channels in the Discord. As we get more info, we'll release it. As usual, guides will be updated as we get closer to the patch. And then assuming I can get people to say yes, I'd love to get a few folks to do one more podcast before the launch, probably next weekend, to talk more focused about Mythic Plus. So if you want that, everyone just go tell Twix to say yes when I ask him. And we'll do that next week. All right, Saeldur, any shout outs or anything you want to say before we close off?
I'm just having a quick last scroll through, and the one thing that comes out to me is Crab, your charge is dead. Crab. Yeah. I'm happy. I'm quite happy.
For now.
Oh, and shall
Yeah,
we
we
say,
covered
no, we
Seven.
covered that one. Yeah, for now. Yeah, I think we've gone through everything. There'll be more stuff, but we'll post stuff in the Discord. There'll be one last podcast before the raid, but that'll be Mythic Plus focused. So if anything changes, surprisingly, it'll get covered at the start of the next
Yep, for
podcast
sure.
with the other guys. But otherwise, I
Sweet.
think that's all for now. More in-depth information will become available as it becomes more available. We just can't tell you gear.
Yeah,
We don't have it finalized.
they're changing so much, and some stuff is still feels unfinalized. So we're kind of working with what we got for now, and we'll update you guys as we figure stuff out. So, all right, well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We will catch you next time, maybe next week. And yeah, we will catch you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.